Princess Ilsa was born on a night when the royal jeweler had run out of gold. There had been a fire in his workshop that spring, a spilled crucible, a curtain too close to the flame, and though no one was hurt, half his stock had melted into a single ugly lump before anyone could save it. He had been meaning to travel to the capital for more, but babies do not wait for jewelers to restock, and Ilsa arrived 3 weeks early on a howling winter night with no crown to greet her. Her father, King Baron, was not a man who liked to be caught unprepared. So while the midwives cleaned up and the physician fussed and the whole castle rang with the particular chaos that follows a royal birth, the king sat by candlelight with a single sheet of parchment meant for a treaty he'd been too tired to finish reading, then folded it clumsily, laughing at himself the whole time, into something that was, if you squinted, almost certainly crown-shaped. He placed it on his newborn daughter's head. It slid immediately over one eye. Everyone in the room laughed, and someone wrote it down in the royal record, because that was the kind of thing that got written down. And the king swore that a proper gold one would be made by morning. Morning came, then week came, then a year. The gold crown was commissioned, then delayed, then commissioned again, then simply forgotten. Because by the time Ilsa was old enough to wear a crown for more than a photograph, she had already worn 11 paper ones, each folded fresh by her father on her birthday, each one a slightly better fold than the last as he practiced the creases over the years. It became, without either of them quite deciding it, a tradition. By the time she was 6, the whole kingdom expected it. By 16, no one could imagine her in anything else. The other kingdoms found this scandalous. Visiting royalty arrived at state dinners with their sisters and daughters, glittering in sapphires the size of eggs, tiaras that had survived 3 wars and 2 revolutions, crowns with names of their own passed down through 11 generations. And there, at the head of her father's table, sat Ilsa in a crown of folded parchment, soft and fuzzy at the creases from years of handling, faintly translucent where the light caught it. "Doesn't it embarrass you?" asked Prince Aldrich of the Amber Coast, during what was officially a trade summit, but which he had privately decided was an extended audition for her hand in marriage. He said it lightly, the way people say cruel things when they want to be, able to claim later that they hadn't meant them cruelly. "Should it?" Ilsa asked, buttering her bread without looking up. "A paper crown!" He gestured at it as though presenting evidence in a trial. Anyone could make one in an afternoon. Anyone could fold themselves a crown and call themselves royalty. It means nothing. "Good day." Ilsa set down her knife. "Try it then." But she had a servant bring a square of fine parchment and set it in front of him, along with a small bone folding tool her father always used. The whole table went quiet, delighted by the prospect of a demonstration. Aldrich, who had not expected to be taken up on his own rhetorical flourish, folded with the confidence of a man who had never folded anything in his life. The paper fought him. His corners refused to meet. What emerged, after several increasingly irritable minutes, looked less like a crown and more like a poorly made boat, or possibly a wounded bird. He wore it anyway, chin high, for exactly 4 minutes, until his own advisers at the far end of the table began to laugh behind their napkins, and he tore it off and threw it into the fire, with more force than the moment strictly required. "You see," Ilsa said, not unkindly, once the room had settled, "a golden crown means you were born to something. It sits there. It doesn't ask anything more of you than existing. But a paper one you have to earn the folding of. Every single time, or it falls apart in your hands within the week. I've refolded mine 1,100 and some odd times since I was old enough to do it myself. Have you done anything 1,100 times in your life, Prince Aldrich? Anything at all, besides losing your temper at dinner?" He had no answer for that. He left 3 days early, citing urgent matters at home. The trade agreement, notably, was signed anyway, and rather generously in Ilsa's kingdom's favor. His advisers, it turned out, had been quite impressed by the whole affair, whatever their prince felt about it. The real trouble came the winter Ilsa turned 19, when a warlord from the eastern passes, a man called Kesh the Undivided, for reasons no one outside his own army fully understood, marched to the border with an army large enough to make the scouts' reports read like exaggerations, though they weren't. His message arrived by messenger hawk, tied with black thread. Surrender the kingdom, or I will take the crown from the princess's head myself and melt it down as a trophy for my hall. His own scouts, who had spent weeks watching the castle from the tree line, had to explain to him carefully, because he was not a man who enjoyed being corrected, exactly what crown he'd actually be melting. A folding one, made of paper, refreshed yearly by her father with a bone tool and a steady hand. Cash did not laugh, which surprised his generals, who had already prepared several jokes for the occasion. He was old enough to remember his own grandmother, a peasant woman from a mountain village, who had ruled her household and half the valley around it with nothing but sheer stubbornness and a shawl. She'd worn so many years it had gone soft and grey and had, in its way, become a kind of crown itself, something everyone recognized. Something that meant this is a woman you do not cross, though it had cost her nothing but time to earn. He understood, in a way none of his laughing generals did, that some things are dangerous precisely because they cost nothing to make and everything to keep. Still, he had an army, and armies do not turn around for old memories. He marched. Ilsa met him not at the palace gates, behind walls and soldiers, but out on the frost-hard field between their two armies, entirely alone, her paper crown catching the weak grey light of a winter morning. Her father had argued against it for 2 days. She had gone anyway, before dawn, before he could stop her a second time. Cash rode out from his own lines to meet her, more out of curiosity than courtesy. Flanked by 2 guards, he waved back after the first 50 yards. "You could have sent a general," he said, looking down at her from his horse, "or stayed behind your walls and made me come to you properly." "I could have," Ilsa agreed, tilting her head back to meet his eyes without flinching. "But you didn't march 3 weeks through the passes for my general. And you didn't march 3 weeks through the passes for my general. You marched here for the crown, so here it is." She reached up, unpinned it. It took only a moment. It was only paper and a single pin, and held it out to him across the frozen ground. Cash stared at it. Soft, worn thin at the folds from years of handling, still faintly warm from her hair despite the cold. He had ridden 3 weeks and lost 2 men to frostbite in the passes, half expecting to feel something like triumph. At this exact moment, the moment his hand finally closed around what he'd come for, instead he felt absurdly like a grown man snatching a child's drawing off a kitchen wall. He didn't take it. "Why do you still wear such a foolish thing?" he asked, and there was no mockery left anywhere in his voice now. Only a real and uncomfortable confusion, the kind that comes when a plan you've carried for weeks suddenly refuses to make sense up close, because everyone who's ever tried to take it from me learns exactly the lesson you're learning right now, Ilsa said. It was never the crown they wanted, not really. It was what the crown meant. That this kingdom isn't held. Safe from anyone clever enough to break in. It's held together because someone gets up every year and folds the thing themselves by hand. And everyone who lives here knows it. And that's harder to burn down than you might think. You can't conquer a habit, Cash. You can only outlast it. And I don't think you have 1,100 more days in you than I've already spent on this. Cash sat on his horse in the cold field for a long time. Long enough that his breath and his horse's breath made small twin clouds in the air between them. Looking at a girl in a paper crown who was, he slowly realized, not afraid of him at all. Not because she believed she could win a war against his army, but because she had already understood something about power that his entire life of conquering mountain passes and stubborn valleys had somehow never managed to teach him. He turned his army around that same afternoon before the light failed, without ever crossing fully onto her kingdom's side of the frozen field. Some months later, a single messenger arrived at the castle, not with tribute, not with any of the customary gifts of surrender or alliance, but with one sheet of parchment, the finest his kingdom produced. Paper so fine and soft it was nearly cloth. A note was folded inside it, in handwriting that had clearly taken more care than the man's reputation suggested he was capable of. For the next fold, Ilsa used it for her crown that year. Her father, when he saw the quality of it under his bone-folding tool, remarked that he'd never worked with paper so fine, and asked, half joking, whether she meant to write back. She did, eventually, 3 words, nothing more, sent by the same route the parchment had come. But the original note she kept. It's folded now, tucked inside a much smaller, much more careful shape, a bird, wings slightly asymmetrical, from where her hands weren't quite steady the first time she tried it, and it lives in the bottom drawer of her writing desk, where she keeps the things that matter most, which is to say, the things that cost nothing to make and everything to keep.
Please subscribe my channel, like and share my video.